All right, we're live. Hello, Alicia.
Hey,
How's it going?
it's going great, actually. I'm happy to be here with
Awesome.
y'all.
I'm so excited. We've got an awesome packed day for our Day of Action and Healing, and I'm so excited to introduce Elicia Gonzales, who's the executive director at Women's Medical Fund. No, you'll talk a little bit about yourself in a minute, Alicia, but just wanted to pop in and introduce you. I'm really excited to be able to do this work with you in this space and be joined by our supporters today. I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of our supporters and a lot of folks across the state took it to the streets a couple weeks ago. And for us, we really wanted to bring folks back and really think about the ways that we can make our organizing and our work more sustainable. And I think today we have an awesome lineup, including you speaking today about what abortion liberation means, why abortion funds are important, and why it's so important to support abortions every day. And want to make sure that we're stressing that to our supporters and folks across the state and across the country that our work is definitely stronger when it is more sustainable. So I'm excited to be able to introduce you and turn it over to you to talk a little bit about yourself. And thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So next slide, please. So I always just like to start off just to share a little bit more about me. So you'll hear about that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about specifically WMF, contextualize that within our work with other abortion funds, talking specifically about how abortion relates to white supremacy, and then more of a call to action that some folks might have heard about during the marches that just happened recently. So, and then of course, in an ideal world, we will leave plenty of time for questions because I love engaging in dialogue versus talking at people. So hopefully we can do that. So next slide, please. So clearly I was born a boogie, obviously. So I've been the executive director at Women's Medical Fund since July of 2017. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, but I've been in Philly for a very long time. I live currently in Fishtown with my wife and our two furry cat children. I have a master's in social work and sexuality education, so this line is very much aligned with my personal beliefs, my philosophical beliefs, and my professional kind of background. I won't read the rest of it, but I just want to kind of help folks think about when we're thinking about our work and what motivates us. It's important to think through also like what grounds us and what is our guiding principle, like what draws us to fight the fight. And for me, it's really that I believe everybody should be sexually healthy and whole. So whatever I can do to help advance that, and obviously access to abortion, being able to decide if you want to parent or if you don't want to parent, is pretty core to my personal philosophies. So yeah, I encourage everybody to explore that for yourself because clearly you chose this issue to get behind for a reason, and I think sometimes it's helpful to just stay tethered to that purpose. Next slide, please. So WMF. WMF exists to protect and expand access to abortion for folks who are low income through two avenues: direct service and community organizing. Our direct service work includes our helpline, which we've been operating since we started in 1985. And then our community organizing work is really different from like legislative advocacy. We really see our work as connecting with building power in community and ensuring that folks are reminded that abortions have always existed in community. And so being able to provide those resources and support to ensure that that kind of community care can continue. I just want to point out quickly this little asterisk, which is that at WMF, we use gender inclusive language because it should come as no surprise, but not just folks who identify as women get abortion or need access to abortion funding. So everywhere possible, we use gender inclusive and gender affirming language. In the next week, I think it already is. I am losing all track of time, but we are actually changing our name to really back up that belief because Women's Medical Fund is a very gendered name. And so we're going to have a name very soon, which I will tell you all about when that's going to be revealed. And I hope folks are excited by it. We are thrilled by it. So we're able to walk the walk and talk the talk finally. So next slide. So a little bit more about us. We thought we were the oldest fund in the country, and so we just were going around saying that, but origin stories are important. We're actually not the oldest fund in the country, but we are one of the oldest funds. Folks started to organize in 1981, shortly after the Hyde Amendment went into effect in 1976, so that when the Medicaid restriction in Pennsylvania occurred in 1985, we were ready to go. So folks were recognizing that they couldn't convince the legislature to try to overturn the Medicaid ban. So they instead said, you know what, let's go ahead and raise funds and get it out the door to people who are going to need funding for abortion care. So the Hyde Amendment basically prevents anybody from using federal dollars to obtain an abortion. So this not only includes people who have Medicaid insurance, but it also includes people in the military, people on Native reservations, and anybody else who is getting federally funded sponsored care insurance, which I think a lot of folks kind of gloss over. But it's a pretty overreaching law that is absolutely rooted in racism. We believe wholeheartedly that anybody should get access to an abortion regardless of their zip code, their reason, their method, or how far along they are in pregnancy. We serve about 3,200 people every year financially in a 10-county region in PA, which is why we're not the only, but we are the largest fund in the state. And I want to point out, you'll hear me say this a lot about, disproportionate impacts and how laws and restrictions and things are hitting hardest folks who are Black and Brown identified, Indigenous, and already struggling to get by. So before COVID, the average amount that we would give out in funding per person was about $132, and that would range each year just by a couple of dollars. Because of COVID now, that's gone over $240 per person, which is a huge increase for folks who are already unable to access that care. Next slide, please. I always like to paint a portrait of who's accessing abortion funding because the anti-abortion folks have done a very horrible job at painting the picture of who gets an abortion. But people who call our helpline are living in incredible poverty, earning just about $8,200 a year, and are incredibly resourceful with how they're making ends meet. So I just want to throw that out there too, that folks are incredibly resourceful and figuring out how to get by when they've been underserved for generations. About 23% of the folks we served were uninsured, 67% were on Medicaid, 11% were survivors of domestic violence or rape, 72% were already parenting. And I just want to really underscore this because people are making this decision that's best for themselves and for their families. And so folks are already parenting at least one child at home and are grappling to just figure out how to make ends meet for the folks that they already have and are taking care of. And so forcing somebody to carry to term would just further drive them deeper into poverty as well as their family. And we just can't stand for that. It's very unjust. About 88% of our folks were teens, 19 and under. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier that WMF is absolutely not alone. We're part of an incredibly large network of abortion funds across the country. Folks who may be watching who aren't in Pennsylvania, you can find your abortion fund by going to abortionfunds.org. I should have included that on the slide, but I didn't. But there are roughly about 90 funds across the country. And a lot of the times folks don't know about the funds as much, but we've been doing this work, like I said, since the 80s. We know what we're doing. And so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I know that there'd been some conversations over the past few years about like, oh, we need to create this network. There's already a network that exists. And so we just want folks to know about that and to support that network. This just shows how many folks were served collectively across the country. We really pride ourselves as being like a community network of funds that are very localized. So we know best like how to serve folks like in our immediate community, because that's where our roots are. And we really are the experts in direct service. And it's not just about access to abortion, but it's also helping with lodging or travel, figuring out childcare. In some cases, as will hopefully be the case here at WMF, also connecting to other resources like diapers, formula, menstrual products, emergency contraception, things like that. So these are ways in which funds have been doing this work for a very long time. Next slide. So this is where I think it starts to get real juicy, which is that all abortion restrictions are white supremacist. Like there's zero denying that. Um, Abortions are part of a long and sordid history of the state, of our government trying to control and regulate specifically Black, Brown, and Indigenous bodies. So there's just a few examples here, and the list is exhaustive, but a few examples that I want to lift up are obviously slavery, forced sterilization, which is a very common and recent occurrence now. It didn't just happen way back in last century, but it's happening to this day, where folks, specifically Black and Brown folks, are being sterilized without their consent. They're the birthplace of the OB/GYN field and profession, as well as birth control in general, was done at the expense of Black women. And so when we talk about Black folks accessing birth control and maybe some reluctance or anxieties around even just medical care in general, but definitely reproductive health care, you have to contextualize it within the harm that was caused at the hands of medical providers who just really were inhumane and unjust when it came time to talking about Black folks, specifically Black women. The foster care system, so you'll see in the next slide here, but the foster care system is absolutely part and parcel rooted in white supremacy and harmful to our communities. And I know it's not sometimes a terribly popular position to take, but if you want to know more about it, you can absolutely read Dorothy Roberts, who you'll see about on the next slide. And then, of course, criminalizing pregnancy. We just posted something on our Instagram about a woman who was arrested for having a miscarriage. That was just, I want to say this week, if not last week, that this occurred. So this is common occurrences happening today that I just want to point out. I put in here the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act because with the Texas bans that came up, and of course were egregious and awful, but I want to just remind folks that any restriction to abortion is extreme. It's not normal, and it's really specific to the United States. In Pennsylvania, there is a mandated 24-hour wait because, you haven't thought about it enough. So let the state tell you what you should do with your body and to think about it longer. You also have state mandated counseling, which is filled with untruths and not medically accurate information. Parental consent for anybody under the age of 18. And the part of that's gross enough, but the part of it that is the most alarming is that if a person cannot get parental consent, then they have to go before a judge and literally prove that they're emotionally mature enough to have an abortion. But no such parallel exists for raising a child, right? Only for having an abortion. So it makes a lot of sense. As well as just endless and endless regulations for providers. So they are basically just trying to set up all these hoops for folks to go through so that they can shut down. Like that's the goal. So all of these are unnecessary and create, in our opinions, undue burdens. So we need to get rid of this PA Abortion Control Act. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit more of like an illustration of what I talked about before, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but to show again the relevancy and the current day enactment of white supremacy and its connections to reproductive health. So again, up until 2010, female inmates were forced sterilized. You can see here a grid or a graph, I should say, that talks about the disproportionate way in which Black and Brown folks in particular are getting their children taken away from them and placed into foster care. Dorothy Roberts, I can't speak highly enough of. Dorothy has a lot of books. One of them particularly is specifically about the foster care system. So I would encourage folks to check her out and to read her books if you want to deepen your knowledge about these connections. I don't necessarily need to go through all of these, but I just wanted to have them there as examples. Next slide. So this is a fun argument I like to have with folks. There are a lot of folks who definitely tout that they are pro-life. And what we like to say is that if you're calling yourself pro-life, what that actually means is forced birth, right? So it's not that you are supportive of, the fetus or the baby or whatever term you want to call it. You actually are saying that you have the authority to have somebody else carry to term. This in and of itself is egregious and violent in and of itself, but made even worse when you take into consideration the maternal mortality rate in our nation and specifically in Philadelphia. So a recent report showed that Black women are 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than white women. And the first statistic is just, if this doesn't make you want to vomit, then I don't know if you can call yourself a human being. But 73% of the pregnancy-related deaths in Philadelphia were of Black women. We're not doing something right here. There's multiple factors that folks report contribute to these disparities. The one that I obviously have bolded that doesn't get talked about enough is structural racism. And I think everybody probably watching this knows this, but language is really important. So we have to name that it's actually racism. It's not prejudice or bias or anything like that. It's white supremacist, anti-Black racism. And until we can get comfortable owning up to that and addressing that and atoning for some of that harm that's been caused in our country at the hands of medical providers, at the hands of the nonprofit industrial complex, at the hand of politicians, at the hand of families, etc., we're not going to get where we need to get to. So naming the thing is part of our work. Next slide. Okay. I went through this far more quickly than I thought, so we have lots of time. But one of the things that was frustrating, just to be transparent for us, was that after the Texas ban went into effect, we started to hear folks talking about wanting to organize a march. And I'm all for marches. I kind of, got my teeth, sunk my teeth into this work by participating in marches back in the day. And I know that a lot of folks can become really politicized and radicalized even by having a sense of community and camaraderie when you go out and like literally take to the streets, maybe shut down traffic, make these signs that are really outspoken and kind of speak your mind. So I don't want to discourage folks from marching, but marching is the floor, not the ceiling. And marching without action, without a specific call to try to change a system is just a parade. And so what we did in collaboration with some folks is we put together a call for folks to march and so taking the pledge to do something more than just marching. So there's a list over here on the left-hand side that says what you can do. So one of the things that we always want folks to do is pay for abortion. That doesn't have to just be through an abortion fund. That could be your neighbor. That could be your cousin. That could be your niece, your nephew. And so just paying attention to who in your community might need funding and then kick in some coins for that. Obviously, at an abortion fund, we always are desperately in need of money. Just to kind of put it into perspective. So again, in Pennsylvania, we serve about 3,200 people every year. The actual estimated need is closer to 7,000. So we're not even coming close to like half of what's actually needed. And in part because of COVID, right? Which I said the cost is driven further out of reach because people have lost their jobs. They've lost the ability to lean on their friends and their families who also have lost their jobs or have gotten decreased wages to generate the money that they would need to cover the cost of the abortion. So that combined with, and this kind of gets a little bit into the weeds, but there was a national funder who had been basically subsidizing abortion care for some time, and they just had to reduce the amount that they give out nationally, which means that abortions feel like they're more expensive. So what would before cost $300 for a person, now when they go to a clinic, they're being told is $500. So those two factors combined mean that at WMF, we are estimating that we would need $20,000 more a month just to try to squeak by. This is a very conservative estimate that does not take into account costs for travel, costs for wages that are lost because you have to go to at least 2 appointments, right? Childcare, things like that. It's gotten to a point that it's almost laughable in the sense of like I laugh to keep from crying because $20,000 a month is significant. But so please, like, donate if you're able to donate. We always encourage folks to sign up to be a clinic escort. You can do this at Planned Parenthood. You can do this at an independent clinic. We included the link to one of our local clinics just because they sent us the link, to be honest, but you can do this at multiple places. We also want folks to thank an abortion provider. It oftentimes is a thankless job that is incredibly dangerous. Bomb threats, death threats, emotional, warfare is being targeted to folks who provide abortion care. And, the way that we think about it is that they're healers. Like they are doing the work of helping people to be healthy and whole. So thank them if you're able to. Lastly, I'm assuming that if you're watching this, that you're somebody who probably already considers yourself to be a supporter of abortion access, of reproductive health, of reproductive justice, things like that. So this specifically is a challenge and a call in, if you will, for all of you, which is that we have to do better about unlearning some of the ways in which we are inadvertently perpetuating white supremacy, anti-Black racism, transphobia, etc. And so on the right are a list of resources that can help you with that. And this is, again, not an exhaustive list. This is just to kind of get us started. One of the ones that I want to lift up as a person myself who's, non-Black, Latina, but, white, is the book Me and White Supremacy. It's not a book that you read. It's actually a book that you do. So carve out some time, put some work in around unlearning and shedding and kind of getting in touch with the way in which white supremacy flows through your veins. No one person has not been impacted by white supremacy. And so we have to collectively do that work. There's a couple of other websites that resources that I'd like to point out are specifically around gender affirming care. This one is a little bit of a sticking point for a lot of folks who are very nervous, I'll say, for lack of a better word, about removing the word women or focusing on more than just cisgender women when we're talking about reproductive care and abortion access. But it really is unjust, and it really is perpetuating violence against folks if we are not using not gender neutral, but gender affirming language when we're talking about our work, and more so than just language, but actually getting in touch with how do you help somebody feel safe and affirmed and seen in this work, right? And we all have so much to learn and to unpack. And so I would love for folks to kind of follow along with that. And I think that's it. I went through this really quickly. I was not anticipating going through this that quickly, but I would love for folks, if they have any questions, concerns, comments.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, Alicia, so I think it was just that good. But obviously folks can follow up with you. I see that you shared your email on the slide, so folks can we totally encourage folks to reach out and ask any follow-up questions.
Yes. And I also just wanted to lift up, because I forgot to mention earlier, but I said at the beginning that WMF is changing our name. And so we're incredibly excited. We are going to be revealing that new name at our event on October 26th. So if you're able to join us, we would love to. Love to have you. Registration is free. We're asking for a suggested donation of $25. And in addition to learning about our name, we're going to encourage folks to play trivia, dress in a costume. We are having a costume contest, including prizes. So it can incentivize people to kind of like be fun and goofy with us, which is what we love to do. If you're not able to join that event on the 26th, of course, as I said, and I wouldn't be doing my job as an ED if I didn't say this, but donate if you're able to. We are constantly looking for donations of all sizes, literally $5 to $5,000. It all really does help people get access to the care that they need. I'm trying to think. Anything else, Amy? Did you have any questions or anything that you were hoping I covered that I didn't get to?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we have plenty of time left, so I know for the next segment with Sister Song, folks have plenty of time to take a break, grab some food, go to the bathroom, relax. And I just want to thank you, Alicia, for making the time to join us today. I always learn something new every time you give this presentation, so thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Awesome.